The battle between Manchester United star Marcus Rashford and Downing Street over free school meals has resumed this week. So in round one, Rashford campaigned for free school meals to continue over the summer holidays. So normally free school meals are something you get when you go into school. Because of the lockdown, because schools were closed, they were introduced as vouchers. The government had argued that they wouldn't be giving out those vouchers during the summer term because it's not during the summer holidays, because it's not the normal time when kids would get free school meals. Rashford launched a really successful campaign against that, against the fact that they'd be cut for the summer holidays, got loads of traction, ended up getting support from the Labour Party, who put forward an opposition motion, which looked like it was going to win, and the government had to U-turn. So people on low incomes got vouchers for free school meals throughout the summer. What Marcus Rashford has noticed now, and why we're in round two of this fight, is because whilst the government were willing to pay for free school meal vouchers in the summer for students on low income, sort of accepting that in the coronavirus crisis, people are short of cash and you shouldn't let kids go hungry in the summer during a global pandemic. I mean, in my mind, you shouldn't let them go hungry anytime, but I'm putting you in the head of the Tory logic on this. But they don't want to do the same for this half term and for the Christmas holidays, even though, as you know, anyone can see, we're still in the middle of a global pandemic and loads of people are out of work, and it's going to be a really difficult Christmas for many people. Marcus Rashford has rightly come out and said, you need to do this again. You need to provide school meal vouchers for people over half term and over the winter. He's been promoting a petition. Let's get up the tweet from Marcus Rashford, which was from late last week. So this is sort of really sparking the next round in this battle. So Marcus Rashford tweeted, "The British public care 225k and rising," and then a link to the petition, which at this point 225k people have signed. "We will accept no less than the free ask. There are 1.5 million children we are not reaching with the free school meal scheme because of the universal credit cap. 1.5 million children in the UK in 2020 with no support." And then we can go take a look at those free demands. So it says the expansion of free school meals to every child from a household on universal credit or equivalent, reaching an additional 1.5 million 7 to 16-year-olds. Expansion of holiday provision, food and activities to support all children on free school meals, reaching an additional 1.1 million children. And increasing the value of the Healthy Start vouchers to £4.25 per week and expanding into all those on universal credit or equivalent, reaching an additional 290,000 pregnant women and children under the age of 4. Now, I mean, something that Marcus Rashford is very good at doing, I mean, obviously using his platform to try and achieve, great ends, is he puts stuff in, it's so difficult to disagree with that. How can you disagree with giving enough money so that kids can have good meals throughout the school holidays? How could you possibly oppose that? Well, there was a vote on it today in Parliament. So just like last time, Labour have sort of backed up Marcus Rashford's campaign by putting forward an opposition debate. This time it went to a vote and it lost. So Conservative MPs voted against the free school meals for a million children. It was defeated 322 to 261 votes. Appalling, tragic. If one of your MPs voted against this, write him a letter now because they're a disgrace. But what I do want to show you now is how they are defending this. Because obviously you have to tell yourself quite a complicated story to justify, withdrawing meals from kids on low incomes, but they do manage it. So this was Tory Minister Paul Scully defending his plan at that time to vote against extending free school meal vouchers over the holidays.
Do you want to feed hungry children or not? That's a simple question. Some of the Conservative colleagues have already come out. Anne-Marie Morris has tweeted she'll be supporting us. I think Robert Halfon is on his way to supporting us. This is a matter of conscience. It's about principles before party. Are you going to put money forward to feed hungry children in one of the toughest winters of our generation or not? And if you're not going to, you have to go back to your constituencies and face the music.
We've had a situation where children are been going hungry under a Labour government for years. What we've done, we've put a universal credit system in place, which allows flexibility for people to go back to work and then topping up their incomes, so they don't have the cliff edge of the old benefit system that we saw under the previous Labour government. So we have been starting to tackle those issues of the people that are at that point on the pay scale, and making sure that their children can get fed.
Paul, did you say that children have gone hungry for years? Is that a division? I mean, is that acceptable?
No, it's not. Which is why I'm saying that we're actually been looking at how we can help parents over the long term, rather than the kind of situation that Tulip is sorting out. What can we do that's actually going to mean that the lowest paid can actually help feed their children for weeks, months and years to come? That'll be increasing the national living wage that we'd be doing, introducing the flexible universal credit that allows them to top up and go back to work, which ultimately is the best way of making sure that you can work with your children and give them the
Laura, will they change their
lifestyle.
minds on?
Children have gone hungry for years. That's his that's his justification to the country, but also to himself, why he's happy to vote to take away free school meal vouchers for children on low incomes when they're out of school term. So we say, no, people have gone hungry for years during half term, so this is a normal year, so kids should go hungry again. I mean, for one, it's not a normal year. I mean, there is unemployment and people struggling with incomes to a much greater degree than they have, in recent memory because of this coronavirus pandemic. But also, how is people have always gone hungry, so now they should go hungry? How is that a good argument? It's unbelievable.
The way that their arguments work as Conservatives, it's kind of on a par with you use an iPhone, therefore you can't criticise capitalism. It's like, well, you could have found that there were children who couldn't find food in 2009 if you looked hard enough. We know the data is around 2.6 million children were in relative child poverty in 2009-10. That was the last year of the Labour government. Before this pandemic, i.e. last year, that had gone up to 4.1 million. So it's almost doubled. Clearly with COVID, it's going to go far higher still. And the idea that, parents going into work, having the minimum wage topped up, it's not a living wage, it's a minimum wage, will help them. It is categorically untrue. Anybody who wants to do their research, and this is more than welcome to do so, go online, look at the data regarding in-work poverty. You're more likely to be in poverty now if you're in a household with somebody that works than that doesn't. That's quite a new development. And you can basically map on the rise of child poverty within work poverty. And this isn't new. This has been out there for a very, very long time. So rise in child poverty aren't because people haven't got jobs, it's because they have jobs and they're not being paid enough or they can't get the hours. And this is now going to be exacerbated with COVID. Either people are having their hours cut, or they're going to be on furlough, or they've lost their job altogether. So it just seems just an utterly ridiculous thing to say. How many children will be living in relative poverty by the end of this year? We might be looking at 6, 7 million. I mean, we don't know. That could be the ballpark, given it was 4.1 million at the beginning of last year. That would be, an order of 4 times greater than the last Labour government. So for every kid in poverty then, you've got 4 now. Let's be real. That's a really shambolic way to run a country. That wasn't 100 years ago. It was 10 years ago. And the money's there. Was Eat Out to Help Out? Was that creating a dependency culture? The fact I could go to Nando's and eat a lunch for £5?
No, because they assumed you were already middle class, and middle class people can't be dependent. It's only working class people who can be dependent on the state. It's only their benefits who have to be cut. I want to go to some more Tory justifications of this. And I mean, stupidly, many Tory MPs decided that they were going to express their opposition to the free school meals campaign by getting into a Twitter row with one of the country's most popular people, Marcus Rashford, Man United striker. So to introduce this, I want to first start with the tweet that both of them were responding to. So it's Ben Bradley and Steve Baker who respond, but they're responding to this tweet from Marcus Rashford this morning. So paying close attention to the Commons today and to those who are willing to turn a blind eye to the needs of our most vulnerable children, 2.2 million of them who currently qualify for free school meals, 42% newly registered, not to mention the 1.5 million children who currently don't qualify. So he's saying paying close attention to the Commons because there was going to be that debate and that vote. It has been lost because the Tories voted against it. But let's go to these responses. So Tory MP Ben Bradley decided to wade in and give his sort of justification for why, or his explanation of why he believed Marcus Rashford was wrong on this. Government has a lot of responsibilities, supporting the vulnerable, helping people to help themselves, balancing the books. Not as simple as you make out, Marcus. Extending free school meals to school holidays passes responsibility for feeding kids away from parents to the state. It increases dependency. We've already said, dependency is something in this Tory ideology that only applies to working class people, middle class people who are dependent on the state. That's fine. Industries which are only viable, circo, because the government will hand them huge contracts, 12 billion contracts, to not do their job properly. I mean, that's dependency culture. But even, apart from that, even if you take away the politics from this and just look at this from a human level, what he is suggesting there, that, and even if you think that, people should be disciplined to go back to work, otherwise they'll have financial difficulties, whatever. Even if you buy into that sort of neoliberal, neoclassical ideology that you have to incentivize people to go back to work by making them poor, he is genuinely suggesting that we should leverage hungry kids to discipline their parents. So we're saying, how do we get parents to work harder? We're obviously in the middle of a pandemic. There aren't jobs if even people decide, well, it's not a decision anyway. But
we don't want them to work.
We don't want to make, because that will spread the virus. But the point I want to make is that he there is genuinely suggesting the way we get parents to behave in a way that we like, which is, is rational, utility maximizing workers, is to leverage the suffering of their kids. And also, an important point to make about dependency here, right, is, and this is sort of like a standard sort of Marxist or social democratic idea about dependency, which is that workers are dependent on their bosses to some extent. And the more that the alternative to working in any job is, complete horror, the more dependent they are. So if you live in a decent welfare state in Sweden in the 1970s, to an extent, it's still decent. You've got your healthcare guaranteed, you've got your housing guaranteed, you're guaranteed that your child isn't going to starve if you get fired by your boss. You have the security to organize against your boss. You have the security to maybe decide, oh no, I don't want that job because they don't treat me right. I'm going to hold out and wait till I can get a job which I feel is more suited to me, where I'm treated better, where my dignity is respected. Now, that's possible if you've got this sort of safety net behind you. But if a worker is told, you either keep this job, you either take that job, or your kid starves, how much power does that give that boss? If that boss is someone who's committing sexual harassment in the workplace, and you tell the mum, well, if you don't have a job, then that's your responsibility and your kid should starve. That is making that person so much more dependent on a boss than anyone will ever be dependent on the state.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's just we are looking square in the face at an utterly depraved genre of politics, utterly depraved, completely devoid of any ethics. Because they would then say, well, you should have thought twice about that before you had a child. You might be sexually, harassed one day. Well, there's laws against this. That's not how it works. It's just. We're looking at people with absolutely no ethical compass whatsoever, who are more likely to get upset about being called scum in the House of Commons than voting for voting against a proposed piece of legislation which would keep 1 million kids away from hunger over the next several months. Which do you think is more important?
I know. We're going to get up another. This tweet exchange is even dumber. This is from Steve Baker, who Marcus Rashford wholly owns. So Steve Baker, sort of a hardcore Brexiteer backbencher. So in response to that particular tweet from Marcus Rashford, which I read earlier, Steve Baker quote tweeted it, "No one will be turning a blind eye, and it is wrong to suggest anyone would. Not destroying the currency with excessive QE is also one of our duties." Now, this is bananas. So
he is crazy. He's the craziest MP on the Tory benches.
The policy before, sort of extending free school meals over the summer holidays, cost £120 million. Now, half term and the Christmas holidays are only 3 weeks, 1 week, add 2 weeks. So it's half of that. So we're talking about £60 million. And he thinks that £60 million is going to mean we have to print so much money that it destroys the pound.
Well, presumably he's talking about the fact that we are going to run at least a £200 billion deficit this year, probably significantly higher. But in any case, like you say, more's the reason. If we're spending a deficit of 200 billion, what difference is 120 million going to make? And by the way, you're not particularly productive if you're starving, right? There are some basics that we need to think about here. But he is the most crazy. He wants Britain to go back to the gold standard, Michael. So he is particularly ridiculous and evil.
And you might have noticed, if you had a keen eye, we can get that up one more time, that same tweet, because at the bottom it says the only people who can reply to this are people who follow Steve Baker or people mentioned in it. So he's sort of calling out Marcus Rashford with this idiotic point, and he hasn't let Marcus Rashford reply to him. So Marcus Rashford, smart guy that he is, quote tweets Steve Baker. We can get this up. He says, "At least turn on your comments and let me respond, Steve. I very much welcome conversation on this." And then the most surreal bit is Steve Baker's response to this. "You have 3.4 million followers, Marcus, to my 96K. The power is yours here. Everyone knows feeding hungry children is a top priority. I'd like to see universal credit boosted. But if the economy and currency collapse, the poor will be devastated. Alleging a blind eye is just wrong." Now, we've already talked about why it's ridiculous to suggest that paying £60 million for some poor kids to have free school meals is not going to collapse the currency. This is someone who wanted a no-deal Brexit, by the way. He's spent the last 4 years fighting for a no-deal Brexit, which is, I mean, I don't think it would be the worst thing to ever happen, but one thing it's not going to have a good effect on is the value of the pound. So this guy thinks that a no-deal Brexit, which has already cost billions in preparation, is going to be more damaging to the currency than £60 million to make sure that poor kids... The more ridiculous bit here, though, is this idea that you have more power than me. Like, only one of you, there's Marcus Rashford and then there's Stephen Baker, only one of you got to vote today in Parliament on the motion to extend free school meals over half term and the winter holidays. It was Steve Baker. Steve Baker voted against it. So he said, oh, I might be elected an MP. I might be the person who makes the law. But if you've got more Twitter followers than me, you're more powerful than me.
Such an online comment, isn't it? I may have, I may be one of 650 legislators in this country, but, how many engagements did I get this month compared to you? Not much. People are saying, by the way, people are saying in the comments, this story is a bit too online. I don't think that's fair, and I'll tell you why. Normally, I agree that it's important not to obsess over social media stories. I agree with that entirely. But I think clearly that the scope for pushback in terms of the government's mismanagement on COVID is quite limited because people can't protest. People can't go into meetings. People can't do all the things, the associated things that would normally happen in a political crisis. That's how people respond collectively. And so I think in a moment like that, this is going to be one of the primary ways we're going to see rifts and pushback, whether it's through local politicians like Andy Burnham, and that was incredibly mediatized. Of course, I'd prefer 100,000 people on a demo or a general stroke. Of course I would, but realistically, in the context of a pandemic, that's not going to happen. These kinds of stories in that context, I think, really matter.
The obvious thing in response to it's very online is that there was a vote in Parliament today on it, right? So there was a material opportunity for the Tories to change their policy. They did change it last time, which shows that this kind of thing matters. I mean, obviously, him being a top Man United and England striker means that he does have a lot of influence. And I think there are many Tories who worry that this is doing them damage, the fact that they haven't U-turned again this time. And as to the tweets, I mean, why I like looking at Tory MPs' Twitter feeds is not so much because I think, obviously the electorate doesn't read Tory MPs' Twitter feeds, but what they do expose is their justifications for doing things. Because I think often, sometimes they get caught out when they go on TV, but in their official communications, normally they've at least got, a PR person to say, I'm not sure you should say that. That makes you sound like a psychopath. But when it's just them on Twitter, they're a bit like, no. Poor kids should go hungry, otherwise the parents won't bother working. That wouldn't go out in an official communication, but on their Twitter, they're stupid enough to think that's a convincing argument.